While the Epic of Gilgamesh and the Queen of Spades are two very different stories, both demonstrate the ways that greed and arrogance tend to steer us away from the path to happiness. Gilgamesh seeks immortality because he fears the pain and degradation of death, while Hermann was driven to madness in his attempt to cheat his way to wealth and status. These works converge on an idea that is still salient in today's world. While the path of least resistance may be tempting, it is often not the most rewarding. Fulfillment in life isn't found by taking shortcuts. We find meaning by embracing our humanity and cultivating whatever relationships and achievements that we can in our short time here on Earth. Gilgamesh's quest for immortality is a selfish pursuit driven primarily by fear. In the poem Gilgamesh recited after Enkidu's death, the words weep and mourn were repeated to emphasize the fragile state that Gilgamesh finds himself in. He's not making rational decisions, he's making emotional ones. Gilgamesh then says he must attain immortality because he is afraid of death. He then repeats this to Siduri, Utnapishtim, and Urshanabi, as if it is a justification for his quest. This highlights not only Gilgamesh's vulnerability, but also his extreme arrogance to believe that he can disregard death, which is fundamental to the human condition. When the serpent steals the flower from Gilgamesh, he weeps again and says, "For myself, I have gained nothing," but I would argue that he is wrong. This quest brought Gilgamesh to grips with his own mortality, and the lessons he learned about life clearly served him well. He was a terrible ruler by almost any measure when he first gained power, yet he was remembered as a wise and influential king. As soon as Gilgamesh put aside his lust for permanence, he was able to accomplish great things and make the world a better place. On the other hand, Hermann's story in The Queen of Spades illustrates the consequences of avarice. Hermann is consumed by greed and covets the fortunes of the gamblers that he watches. However, he isn't a gambler himself. Hermann says that he is not in a position to sacrifice the essentials of life in the hope of acquiring the luxuries. The story makes it clear that he wants these luxuries very badly, but he wants to minimize the amount of risk associated with acquiring them. In fact, Hermann shows his arrogance in the way that he tries to manipulate Lisavieta, the countess, the other players, and fate itself into bending to his will. Pushkin writes that Hermann quivered like a tiger while he waited to sneak into the house of the countess. This simile portrays focus and nervousness. It makes it clear that Hermann is dedicated to the hunt, but there is some part of him that knows that what he is doing is wrong. This sentiment is reflected in Chekalinsky's gambling den when Hermann's hands were shaking, presumably because he was nervous due to the large sum of money that he was wagering. Pushkin uses personification when he writes, "The Queen of Spades winked at him and smiled," to foreshadow Hermann going crazy. Overall, The Queen of Spades serves as a cautionary tale, warning against deceit, manipulation, and arrogance. It reinforces the idea that chasing our own desires can often harm others. Both stories show that the consequences of greed and arrogance are not only personal, but also fundamentally alter our interactions with others and our environment. Gilgamesh and Hermann both experience drastic transformations because of their gluttony, though these transformations are modeled by perpendicular lines. The initial part of Gilgamesh's story shows him abusing his subjects and disregarding the needs of his people. After accepting his own mortality, he returned to Uruk, humbled, and is still remembered as a wise and powerful king thousands of years later. Hermann, on the other hand, was controlled by his greed and hurt himself and everyone around him. Hermann may have lost all his money, but the countess was killed, and Lisavieta scorned. Appropriately, Lisavieta recovered and married a successful man, while Hermann went insane and moved into an asylum. These stories compel the reader to reflect on human propensity to fear, arrogance, and greed. The Epic of Gilgamesh acts as the carrot, showing the wonderful things that can happen when one accepts their fate and struggles to make the best out of a bad situation. The Queen of Spades serves as the stick and shows the pain and suffering that are caused when we try to refute the laws that are fundamental to being human. These lessons remain prophetically relevant in contemporary society. The temptation to take shortcuts in our careers, relationships, and personal growth is often exacerbated by a culture that frequently values ends over means and quick success over hard work. The Epic of Gilgamesh demonstrates that hard work and humility is the true path to happiness and fulfillment, while the Queen of Spades offers an alternative for those who revel in their avarice. While the path of least resistance may offer temporary comfort or superficial gains, the road trudged with purpose leads to genuine happiness and a life of meaning. Through their contrasting endings and lessons, these works invite us to reflect on our value systems and think about the type of lives that we wish to lead. They encourage us to embrace a path that, while perhaps more challenging, leads to fulfillment and happiness. They remind us that meaning is not found through immortality or fortune, but by facing our human limitations with grace and courage, and by living our lives with purpose and integrity.